How's it going? And welcome to episode 203 of On the Wire, proud member of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. I am Adam Howe, per usual, joined by co-host Kevin Hasting. And Kevin, let's get right into it, man. How's the week been going? We are finishing up our preview with my favorite category here, the wild card section. Hence the name of the episode, Living on the Wild Side. I'm excited for this one. How's the week been going for you, and how are you looking forward to what we're about to talk about?
Oh yeah, love it. I love this category as well. It's going to be great. Hope you've had a good week. There's been a lot of stuff going around everywhere, and it's no different here. So this is the first time in 2 weeks that I have felt 100% 2 days in a row.
Well, there you go.
So this is great. I'm ready for this, and a lot of drafting going on. We are in the middle, right smack dab in the middle, like 18th round of a 12-team On the Wire listener league. I have a dynasty draft, slow draft that begins tomorrow morning, another first year player draft that begins Monday morning, TARF on Sunday morning, and we're less than 4 weeks from Vegas. So it's just a blast. This is my favorite time of year right now. Yes.
Yeah. I've got Glarf, my Glarf draft over the weekend as well. Pretty much the entire league out in Detroit. Shout out to all of them. I unfortunately can't be there in person, but I will be there in spirit. Obviously, be there at the draft board. And so that'll be a great time. And my home league, we do our first year player draft in June or in July during the All-Star break.
Mhm.
We're like, in a we've been doing it that way since we added that portion of the Dynasty League back in like early 2000s, and we just never changed it. And the logic behind it was that it allowed us to have a whole year's worth of eyes on draftees. So you get drafted in June in the major league draft, you can't get picked up until the following July in our league. So it gives us, a whole year worth of data and eyes on it, and just to see how everything's worked out. But we do like a lottery early on, right in March, where we do a lottery for the picks. And so that's fun. So it adds another layer of it's a whole different draft. It's like adding two drafts into one at points of the year. So anytime you can add a draft element into your league, do it, because that's sometimes the most fun part of the league is just the drafting part of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we're talking about first year player drafts and rookies, because that's the main topic of conversation for our leagues. Of course, we're going to be focusing on players that will make a difference in 2025, or at least that we think and hope will. But before we do that, bunch of news did break in the last week, so let's get through that. I wanted to lead off with this one specifically, because I think it's kind of ridiculous. And I said to you that before we started recording, but the Chicago Cubs made another signing. They signed Justin Turner to a short-term deal. And in return, in order to make room for him, they end up DFAing Alexander Canario. And to the much of the chagrin of friend of the show, Sarah Sanchez. And Sarah, sorry, we'll pour one out for you. This was kind of a ridiculous thing, but I mean, what role does Turner play on the Cubs for this year? Does he spend the entire year with the Cubs? And I mean, there's got to be a ripple effect to them signing him at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I was as baffled by this as Sarah was, and I'm not a Cubs fan. I have a soft spot in my heart for the Cubs, like I think just about anybody my age does that grew up while getting to watch WGN. It was like we got to watch baseball every day, but it had to be Cubs. Exactly. But yeah, I do not get this at all. If the Cubs are confident that Matt Shaw can begin the season at third base. Mm-hmm. And we'll get more into that later in the show, talking about Matt Shaw. But this to me means they do not have confidence in that being the case, or you don't make this move, in my opinion. And, at over 40 years old now, Justin Turner has been on a very drastic power decline. So I absolutely do not see him keeping this job all season. But unfortunately, it sure looks to me like the Cubs plan on him being the starting third baseman to start the season. But, less than half of the home runs in 2024 that he had in 2023. And everything is on a decline. His max EV was all the way down. I want to say it was like 106. Yeah, 106.8 max EV for the entire season in over 500 plate appearances at over 40 years old. That's not coming back. So these projections have him regressing, and improving and getting to about the same number of home runs he had in 539 plate appearances last year in 350 to 430 plate appearances in 2025. I absolutely do not believe in that. If he's only going to get 400 plate appearances, I do not see double digit home runs here. And if he's not going to get to the double digit home runs, we're looking at a 250-ish batting average and sure, some runs in RBI, but that's it. So fantasy wise, I have zero interest. And as far as the Cubs, it does not make any sense to me. I don't think he will even be a replacement level player.
Sure. I mean, I probably agree a little bit more with what Roster Resource has him in a platoon with Michael Busch at first base. I'm gonna remember Justin Turner barely even touched third base last year between his time with Toronto and Seattle. Played most of his time in what limited capacity he had last year at first base. Whether or not he's got the arm and got the stamina to stick around at third base maybe doesn't hurt Matt Shaw as much, though there are other options that they could move some people around in general. But just having the infield depth alone, yes, does of course trickle down to everybody in the infield, especially both corners, and Matt Shaw being part of that, of course.
Yeah, we've talked about the Cubs overall lineup a couple of times this offseason. This is a nice lineup in terms of projected WAR, right? Everybody, Michael Busch at 1.9. Everybody else above a 2 WAR player other than the catcher, Miguel Amaya. I don't see Justin Turner in this lineup for very long.
No, I can't imagine. So we'll see how long he does end up lasting, and what kind of trickle effect it does make. And we'll know a lot about that as spring training rolls on, and then seeing how many at bats each one of them is getting, and what they're doing with their opportunity. So keep an eye on that situation. I'm going to stick in with hitters. There was a lot of talk in Houston as to what they were going to be doing at second base. A lot of talk about moving Altuve off the position. Obviously, with Bregman leaving the team, opens up a spot at third base, so they got to shift some guys around. In order to fill that gap, the Houston Astros signed Brendan Rodgers away from the Colorado Rockies, and now he spends his time in Houston on a 1-year deal with the Astros, presumably to play second base for them. I mean, you're never, getting away from Colorado, is never a great thing for a hitter, but Houston's not a bad landing spot in general. What's your thoughts on what Rodgers' role will end up being in Houston? And does it make you more interested in him out of Colorado, where you just didn't know you never know what the role is going to be for a youngish player on the Rockies?
Yeah, and he's 28 years old now, and I think we kind of know what Brendan Rodgers is. Never really turned into the star we thought he may have been, but the double-digit home runs, decent run in RBI numbers with a good batting average, not great batting average, but one right around what our targets are for fantasy. So I think this is something we have to watch in spring. How often is Altuve going to play left field? Is he going to be the everyday left fielder? And I'm coming more to terms with that very well could be the case. Lucas Beery, when he was live streaming an auction draft this week referred to Altuve as the Rafael Devers of second base. He is that bad defensively. I remember a few years ago seeing some his defense and thinking, oh, this is kind of fluky. I don't know if you remember that a few years ago where he was making throwing errors from second base and such. And it's been a few years. I kind of forgot all about it, but defensive run saved, he was the worst second baseman in baseball last year. Outs above average, I think he was the third worst. So he is literally Rafael Devers of second base. So if he's going to play every day in left field, that means these playing time projections for Rogers are probably light. He may be the close to, if not everyday second baseman, in which case the projections for just barely getting to double-digit home runs, we're looking more mid to high teens. We're probably looking at that 70 runs, 70 RBI number in this Houston lineup, and he can hit 250, 260. So if Altuve is indeed the everyday left fielder, like I said, I'm coming more and more to believe that, then Brendan Rodgers could be a sneaky late dart here.
Yeah, and I didn't realize. I actually thought this deal was a major league deal, but it's a non-roster invitee deal as well. So, I mean, with Isaac Paredes coming over from the Cubs and presumably taking over third base, Altuve moving to the outfield, there's not a whole lot of infield options besides Rodgers, besides maybe the likes of Mauricio Dubon, who we've talked about a lot. When Altuve was out, Dubon was the one in there, not only taking over at second base for him, but also taking over that leadoff spot in those stints where Altuve was out for extended periods of time. So watch that battle as well. That obviously makes Dubon, who has no options left, same right-handed bat, just like Rodgers is. That might be an actual battle that we are watching in spring training, just between those two guys, and whoever wins out that starting second base job in Houston.
Yep.
All right. We got a whole bunch of pitchers out in here to talk about. Let's get into Andrew Heaney first and foremost, leaving the Texas Rangers and signing a one-year deal with the Pittsburgh Pirates. Heaney did, he had some stints of good things when he was like basically a follower or a piggyback pitcher in some instances with the Rangers, really showing that he could, strike out 10 guys in 3 innings sometimes, somehow. But overall, still just as wild and unpredictable as ever. Does his role translate to Pittsburgh, or is Pittsburgh simply just, signing somebody so that they can throw them out there and eat innings and do whatever they're going to do as a reclamation project?
I think this is something we need to be careful with here because the landing spot on the surface, I think, seems pretty nice. Going to Pittsburgh, he'll get those innings, like you said. We think of it as a pretty nice ballpark for pitching. So I think that would tend to get us a little excited. I am pumping the brakes because, I mean, his whip is projected to be close to, and by the bat, even over a 1.3. And that's just something I can't take on. I can stomach the projection for an ERA in the 4s if it's a guy that I would stream for matchups and hopefully get him in my lineup when he's performing better than that. But the whip, even in good matchups, tends to stick with the pitcher from game to game. So I want to be careful here and not forget about that. In leagues where Heaney is available on the wire, absolutely, he'll be a guy we talk about with matchups. But I'm going to try. I have drafted him, but now that I have realized that he could be a big whip issue, I have stopped drafting him. I'll be more interested in him as a streamer throughout the season.
Just realized, Kevin, this is the Andrew Heaney we're talking about.
Like, I know. I didn't realize it was that bad.
Yeah, it's like you hold your nose to the ratios for the possibility of 4 innings in 6 or 7 strikeouts. Like that's what you're hoping for. And you're like, I can stomach a bad ERA and a whip in one outing in one stream, but it's not somebody I'm going to keep in my lineup throughout the course of the season. So you're absolutely right. We will be talking about him throughout the season as an option, especially in 12 teamers. There's going to be somebody in your 15 teamer that just holds on to him and makes Andrew Heaney their team streamer, just for that exact reasons I just mentioned. But 12 teamers, he will be readily available on a regular basis, I think. Another pitching signing here. This one's much longer term. Nick Pivetta signs a 4-year deal with the San Diego Padres. And I mean, it makes this whole, I think we kind of talked about it a little bit on a recent show. It's like the Padres are in a little bit of a flux. We don't know what's going on with ownership and all that, but here they are spending money on a pitcher who, did some good things with the Red Sox, made a name for himself, earned his paycheck, but still somebody who can't seem Nick. And I wish I pulled it up ahead of time, but Nick Pollock had that great tweet recently about Nick. What is it? Nick Pivetta is the only pitcher who has been a starter for the last 6 years and could not finish any season with less than a 4 ERA. The only one that fits that bill. And so did he earn this? Ultimately, did he earn this contract? And do you trust him in this new role with the or this new team with the Padres?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring Nick's tweet up because that's exactly what I was looking at. Now it is very intriguing to me that over the past 2 seasons, and yes, he's done that, and 6 seasons he's pitched at least 133 innings, 6 seasons of 133 innings or more without ever having an ERA under 4 is what I was looking at. Now, the past 2 seasons have been his best seasons in terms of ERA, in terms of xERA, in terms of FIP, right? And he's changed his pitch mix. So he completely he ditched his knuckle curve that he was throwing over 20% of the time, even over 25% of the time in 2022. He's ditched that. He never threw the changeup often, but he completely ditched it as well. And he started throwing a curveball in 2023 and 2024. And now the last 2 seasons of 4.04 ERA and a 4.14. So it is intriguing. And the other thing, he's never had an ERA under 4, and some of the projections project him for an ERA under 4. That blows my mind.
Yeah.
Right. So it has to do with these underlying metrics. They like this pitch mix change. And if he can continue to improve, this may be the year. I mean, he's been really close the last 2 seasons. And with this change in his mix, if San Diego can improve on it even a little more, I'm sure they're going to have him adjust something, bringing him in then possibly. And much like Heaney, Nick Pivetta, he's actually going to get drafted even in 12s, probably. But yeah, there's some interest here for me. I think in it, and it's going to depend on the draft. I think you're going to be in some drafts where there's going to be somebody in that draft room that is big on Nick Pivetta, but you may be in other drafts where everybody's just kind of he's one of those types of players and he might fall away. So he's the type of player that it's really going to depend on the room whether I would end up with him on my roster or not.
He's also just one of those guys, one of those last guys that you can kind of pencil in 150 plus strikeouts. As long as, he only has to hit the 150, 140, 150 inning mark, and you can get the 150 to 170 strikeouts out of him. He went, I just missed out on him. I was debating between Nick Pivetta and other players. I ended up going with 2 outfielders at the 16-17 turn, and Pivetta went 3 picks after that. So in the very beginning of the 17th round in our 12-team draft. So you're right. He obviously will get drafted in 12 teamers. He'll probably get drafted in most 15, or definitely in 15 teamers. Whether or not he drops a little bit further He'll still get drafted in those 15 teamers, but I think 12 teamers, he's also a lock to be drafted. See how it works out. You know, you got to wonder. I'm always curious too about like players that make adjustments on old teams and whether or not they hold on to those adjustments as they move. How much of that is accredited to Andrew Bailey and the changes that he made with the pitching staff in Boston across the board, just a mentality that the team had, and whether or not as players leave those environments, how much of that do they either both choose to retain, bring with them, maybe even have it rub off onto other players in their new team's rotation, and how much they're just like, you know what, I'm glad for what it was able to do for me there, but I'm with a new team now. I got a new pitching coach. I'm gonna, drink the Kool-Aid on my new team and forget everything else I learned. So it's interesting to see what kind of, pitchers always experiment with new stuff in spring training. They throw a bunch of stuff that you'll never see in the regular season as well. So you can always take that with a grain of salt, what you see in spring training as far as what their pitch mix is in those starts, especially early on. But I'll still be watching to see kind of like what he's working on most, like what he's throwing the most, so that he can stay comfortable and get into a good rhythm as we head closer and closer to the regular season.
Yeah, for 6 seasons, he was a guy that we were avoiding due to whip as well. But these last 2 years, it has improved much more so even than the ERA. Down with a 1.12 and 1.13 the last 2 seasons with those pitch mix changes. So that makes him really easy for me to put in my lineup, especially in the matchups I like. In spite of that never having a season-long ERA under 4, he has approached it the last 2 seasons, but with that whip staying nice and low, that gives me some comfort as well.
And it didn't come at the cost of his strikeout rate. If anything, his strikeout rate went skyrocketed up in comparison to the years prior. So with more control also came more production in the strikeout department as well.
Home runs have been an issue, and even been more of an issue the last couple of seasons when everything else seems to improve. So that's something. If San Diego has some adjustment for him to make there, if he can give up a few less home runs, the San Diego better for righties as far as power goes as a ballpark. So that'll help with him being a righty and that being same-handed hitting. So yeah, if he can bring that home run rate down just a little bit, I would be confident we're going to see an ERA start with a 3.
Yeah, just obviously attacking the zone a lot more than he was nibbling in the past as well. Keeping things able to be hit, letting his fielders do the work, but obviously with more things in the zone, the more opportunities for home runs are going to arise. So you take the good with the bad there. All right, we got a couple more pitchers to talk about. We're going to get to that right after this quick break. All right, small one here. Not officially, I haven't seen an official signing here, Kevin. Maybe you did. But Lucas Sims was spotted in Nationals camp, assuming that means they're either at least invited him, if not full on signed him to a contract. Can Lucas Sims kind of bring out any of that potential in a new environment outside of, Cincinnati, going to, Nationals ballpark or isn't the most pitcher friendly ballpark either. But at the same time, it's not Great American Small Park. Can you see Lucas Sims being somebody we talk about on a every other week basis throughout the course of the season?
Yeah, possibly. And there's a slight chance he could be in the closer situation at some point in 2025. And I think that's when we would get excited. Roster resource at the moment. And by the way, 1 year, $3 million. He did sign with the Nationals. And roster resource has him as the first guy in the bullpen not listed as a closer. Yeah. Now, that doesn't make him the setup guy because they have 3 closers.
How many closers are listed?
Jorge Lopez, Derek Law, Jose Ferrer. None of these are guys that I can expect to take that job and run with it. They may all get the opportunity.
I mean, Lopez has done it. Lopez has done it, but Yeah, I
Right.
agree.
I think Lopez gets the first shot. I think he starts the season as the closer if the season begins with the roster as it is now. But Lucas Sims is somebody, there was a time in Cincinnati we thought he might take that job there. Never worked out, but it's just going to be something to monitor. I don't think I would have much interest unless he is getting saves because his ratios haven't been that great. We would still talk about him depending on matchups throughout the season, but definitely somebody to keep an eye on and maybe even take a spec dart throw really, really late in a draft and hold, 48th round or later, something like that. But definitely worth keeping an eye on.
Sure. Another pitcher making a team change here. John Means leaves the Baltimore organization, signs like a 1.5-year deal with the Cleveland Guardians. It's a 1-year deal with a team option for 2026. Obviously, coming back from elbow surgery of his own, do we expect John to mean any business? Sorry, it just writes itself, right?
Absolutely.
Can he mean anything to the Guardians throughout the season, and then in turn mean anything to our fantasy leagues?
Probably not. Not unless it's very, very late. He didn't it was his second Tommy John. He didn't have it until June. So if we're looking, 15 months, that's September. And that'd be kind of pushing it. So we might see like the 10 innings we saw from Jacob deGrom last season, but that would be it. So I do not think he will be
Sure.
somebody we even have to pay much attention to in 2025, unless we start hearing things in August that we may see him in September. Because even in the few innings we saw him in 2024 before the injury, he was really, really good as he was clear back in 21 when we got excited about him before these injuries started. The stuff was still there. The strikeouts were there. It was only 20 innings. They were a really, really good 20 innings. So he is somebody that we will be interested in when we see him healthy again. I'm just afraid it won't be in 2025.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of like the Lucas Giolito timeline with the Red Sox.
Yeah,
Red Sox signing
absolutely. And this
exactly.
is a nice structure. I don't know that I've seen it this way before. For these 2-year deals for pitchers that we know are going to be out for a season, Kyle Wright with Kansas City, Giolito with Boston, doing it as a team option for that second year to make sure he is healthy.
Right.
I'm not sure John Means probably was excited about that immediately, but evidently it ended up being more money than he could get from anybody
Anyway,
else with at least that option. So that's kind of an interesting structure. I don't recall seeing that before.
Yeah, I mean, at least they're getting paid while being rehabbed, and
Getting paid to
they're
rehab.
getting
Yep.
their rehab paid for
Yep.
as well.
Exactly.
Not minor league deal here to close out the pitchers here. Ryan Yarbrough signs a minor league deal with Toronto. I mean, Yarborough's had his little stints of success, especially as a follower, as like the first very successful follower that I think most of us think of. Can Toronto get anything out of him in that rotation, or what does that rotation even look like if Yarbrough is part of it?
Yeah, unless they go 6-man, I don't think he would be part of the starting rotation. I think they're fine with Bowden Francis as the 5. Now maybe, maybe he could be the follower, or Yarbrough could be a follower or even opener for one or two of these guys. But Gaussman, Barrios, Bassett, Scherzer, Bowden Francis, I think is probably the 5 there for Toronto.
As long as they all stay
The
healthy.
funny thing, right? And that's what I think this is really a depth move. I don't think we're going to see the Yarbrough that we loved back in Tampa when he could, rack up 9 wins back in 2021, and he was starting some games, but I don't think he probably went 5 innings many of those starts. We've seen this for a while with Yarbrough, but it just seems to me that in spite of having a nice almost 100 innings in 2024, he hadn't been very good since 2020. He bounced back in 2024. Now we see a change of scenery. Um, The only value here is going to be if he ends up being a follower, I believe, because if he is a starter, I don't think he goes 5 innings many days.
Yeah. Fair enough. All right. And then the last thing we'll close out here, another hitter news, not a signing, not a trade, but just an official announcement from the man's mouth, something that we have all assumed was going to be true anyway. But Mike Trout officially announces he will be moving to right field on a regular basis for the Angels. What like now this is kind of like official and we can kind of start seeing how this is going to iron itself out. What does this mean for playing time with the other outfielders? Who's taking over center field officially? And then who does Trout basically kick out, at least cut their playing time so they are sharing playing time in other areas for the Angels?
Yeah, this is one of those instances where I'm not sure I agree with Jason over at Roster Resource. He has Joe Adell as the everyday center fielder, and Joe Adell is absolutely horrible versus right-handed pitching. Mickey Moniak was much better versus right-handed pitching. I think you can flip-flop these projections for plate appearances, right? I believe this is Steamer's plate appearances that are listed here on Roster Resource: 483 for Joe Adell, 294 for Mickey Moniak. I feel like we might need to flip that. If Moniak is going to get the starts in center field, and he had over 100 starts in center field when Trout was out last season and performed well in streaks. Now he had 1 month where he hit like 359 that really boosted his overall numbers. But the rest of the months were decent, and they were better than Joe Adell has ever done versus right-handed pitching. So that's what I'm worried about. If we're drafting Joe Adell thinking we're going to get close to 500 plate appearances, and even if he's playing versus righties, as fantasy managers, we would really try to monitor and get him in our lineup when there's a lot of lefties and not many righties coming up. But at the same time, I really don't think we're getting these plate appearances for Joe Adell unless we see drastic improvements versus same-handed pitching. I think we can swap this, and Mickey Moniak gets more plate appearances as a center fielder.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't see how Trout moving over to right field pushes Adele over to center field either. Like they're not a swap. Like Adele's played some center field in the minors. Obviously, there was no room for him to play center field once he made it into the Angels. There wasn't really much room for Adele to play at all, just because of the way that he kind of started off his career. But he very quickly moved off of center field, playing. I mean, he was already moving off of center field in the minors, playing a lot of left field in AAA as opposed to center field altogether. So even playing some right field as well, but mostly left field in AAA. So he was already moving off of that position. Maybe it was in preparation for obviously not being able to play center field in the majors once he got there. But just to think that you can just kind of move him over to play everyday center field, I think is unwise to assume. So yeah, agreed here. Adele, I think, would be the major loser in this situation as far as plate appearances and just playing the field altogether. There's obviously a DH that can be rotated amongst, but they also have Jorge Soler on the team, who's obviously going to take the majority of the time at that position. All right. Well, we're going to talk about some wild card options and how we are attacking drafts with those darts in mind. We'll get to that right after this break. All right, Kevin. We're going to talk about, as I put this in the outline, like I calling it darts, because what we're going to spend the majority of the third part of the show talking about rookies and how we're drafting them and who we trust, either who we think are going to come up, what kind of role they're going to play. Of course, we're going to play Ask. It's just the easiest way to kind of like gauge interest in different positions that might show up. But in general, like the wild card section isn't always about rookies or prospects that are coming up. It's just about guys that don't really fit into any other particular category. Sometimes it's a dart on a reliever that you think might move into a closer role 3 weeks down the line. Sometimes it's a guy who's hurt and you're going to pick him up 3 weeks before he comes off the IL. or somebody you think is going to move into a position that didn't exist prior, like that opportunity. Sometimes that's talked about an opportunity. Sometimes we talk about it in a wild card. Yes, a lot of it has to do with picking up rookies and prospects as well. But keep in mind, you can't pick up in the NFBC, you can't pick up these rookies if they haven't made a debut yet and they weren't drafted. We all know this rule by now. We talk about it ad nauseum everywhere that you listen to podcasts. Everybody mentions it, and we have every single year. So talk to me a little bit about your mentality on how many darts you allow yourself to make throughout the draft, and where are you more likely is like to throw those darts, beginning of the draft, middle of the draft, or you wait until the very end and throw all the drafts at the very end and hopefully one, because that way obviously you have less risk, more reward situations. So what has been your mentality in the past? Has it changed, and how are you attacking 2025?
Past, especially when it pertained to rookies, even second year players that didn't have a lot of playing time under their belts, I avoided them completely. Now there's been several guys over the past few seasons that have hit the ground running and they've been great. So I have pivoted to some of the lower tiered rookies, not the guys necessarily going second, third round, but guys going quite a bit, later, because we don't anticipate they probably have a job to start the season. So I've been a little more into maybe trying to find one or two of those guys later that could end up, um, in draft season, like Julio Rodriguez, I believe was going after pick 200 until we knew for sure he was in the opening day lineup and shot up draft boards. Right. So that's the range of the draft where I will take a shot or two. Now, as far as darts, it depends on the type of dart. If it's a stash, I'm only allowing myself one, whether it's an injury or a minor leaguer that I don't know is going to be on the roster. I need my roster spots. NFBC, we only get 7 bench spots, no IL.
Mm-hmm.
I'm using at least 6 of them for guys that I can actually use on a weekly basis. The guys I'll take more of a shot on early in the season, draft season, because hopefully I don't have any injured guys yet.
Yeah.
Are guys that we have questions. There's a couple of them, and I don't think you had either of these guys in the next section. So here's a couple of perfect examples. David Festa, roster resource, does not have in the starting rotation right now. Cody Bradford, roster resource, does not have in the starting rotation right now. I like both of these guys as starting pitchers. And if they are either the 6th starter and the teams go 6-man, or if they are bumped to the bullpen or even to AAA, either one of these guys, I think, will be starting games for their teams early in the season, whether it's first injury or performance. I think they both should be in the starting rotation already. And
Sure.
if they are indeed not, as roster resource has, I think they'll be in there soon. So I'm much more likely to take the discount on these guys because they're not listed in the rotation,
Right.
than I am to stash an injured player or a rookie.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of a stash versus a dart is a good is a good thing to really define, because they're not the same. A dart, you can, no matter what, whether or not they perform or not, they're actually playing. I mean, that's the idea. A prospect stash and an IL stash, especially in the NFBC where you don't have the IL spots like you mentioned, they're basically the same thing. They're taking a 0 at that spot, and you only have so much collateral, or so much, to go around, and so many bench spots to go around there. So, does the format matter? And by format, I simply mean how many teams are in your league: 12 teams, 15 teams, go up to 20 teams. Like, the more teams, do you find yourself making, being more aggressive with these these darts, maybe earlier on in the draft rather than later in the draft, because those are the ones that have a better chance in most people's minds, maybe not yours, to hit it big. And you need to be able to make, if you know, it's a not first year last mentality, especially as the teams get bigger. Or is it the mentality of like, hey, I can make more risk in a 12 teamer because the replacement value is there on the wire, which, you know, obviously a lot of people already play that way as well. So what differences do you make when you play in a larger format versus a smaller format?
Has to do with my confidence in how likely I believe it is that I will be able to use them early. So it makes perfect sense that you would think you'd be more likely to draft these guys in a 12-team league due to replacement value. However, guys like the example I use, David Festa and Cody Bradford, I'm drafted in 15s, and I think I'm more likely to draft them in the 15s. One, they may be available on the waiver wire in 12s. They are going after pick 300 and have not been drafted in every online championship, as I'm looking at the ADP for the RotoWire online championships over the past 3 weeks. So one, they may be available in 12s. Two, in a 15, they are going to get drafted. There's going to be somebody that's going to take the same chance I am. So I'm going to bump them up a little bit if I'm confident in them. I'm going to take the higher upside, but less likely to occur in the 12s because of that replacement value.
Sure.
If that makes sense. So it does come into play, but I'm actually, if I'm pretty confident that we're going to see a guy and I like him, I actually bump them up a little more in 15s than in 12s because I need them. I need them on my roster and to be right, and it comes through.
That last part is the most important. Like, I need to be
Yes,
right.
it is. Yes.
It's one of those things where it's like, it really, you know, as long as you're not making this, you know, this kind of decision the first like 3 rounds, it's like, it's not a decision that will lose your league. Even if you're bumping up Bobby Witt a couple years ago, thinking he's going to make the roster, obviously those are the types of decisions that people remember and they think about, and they're like, well, if I hit on Bobby Witt in the 6th round, you know, I'm golden. I just got a 3rd round type of player, or 2nd round type of player in the 6th round. It doesn't sound like much, but that's a kind of a big difference. And to get, you know, of course, if you're gonna get a, you know, a 18th round pick with a 3rd round value, those are the ones that are more rare. Like, those are the darts that we're talking about, trying to hit it big, trying to catch lightning in a bottle. But those simply, they don't happen. And if they do happen, everybody knows about them, and they're going in the 6th round, 7th round, 8th round. Or you get somebody, or you get the cautionary tale of like the Jackson Holidays, that, you know, people bumped up once they really felt like he was going to start, and he just, you know, he didn't pan out in his rookie season. He was less valuable than his draft pick ended up being in like the 10th round or 11th round, where you were getting him in a lot of different places. So there are obviously more cautionary tales than success stories. And I think that's why I think the mentality overall is to stay away. But I think your last statement said it all. It's like, there's in those larger leagues, you have to be right, and you have to be aggressive on those in order to give yourself any kind of an edge over, like, and honestly, what is the difference sometimes over, you know, picking somebody in the 18th round, even a 15 teamer, that doesn't pan out, and you drop a couple weeks into the season, than the player you're going to get that's more guaranteed, more like, and what are they guaranteed for? So I'm down with taking the risk, especially post pick, like post round 15, in most size formats, regardless of size.
Yeah, and I think it's important not to be dead set on, I am absolutely drafting this dart in this draft. Jackson Holiday is a perfect example. He's a type of player that I like because his price is discounted because he didn't hit the ground running and he's still 20 years old, right? So, but his range, right, over the last 3 weeks in the online championships, his ADP is 217. I'm perfectly fine with a dart at that point. His min is 142. I'm not okay with
Sure.
a dart at that point. 263 is a max. Absolutely love the dart at that point, right? So don't be dead set on I am drafting this guy. These aren't the guys you go and get your guy. These are the guys you take when
They,
they're
they fall
available,
to the
when
right
there's not
spot. Yep.
another player you'd rather have, right?
Yep. It's the moment where you're like, you know what? Fantasy baseball is supposed to be fun. I'm gonna take the fun pick
Exactly.
in
I
your
want to root
draft.
for Jackson Holiday this
Yeah,
season.
exactly. Especially if you've done more than a couple drafts and you're like, you know what? I haven't drafted Jackson Holiday yet. This that I don't jump him to 142, but maybe 200. All of a sudden, we're like, okay. We start thinking about it. All right.
Exactly.
Well, let's talk about some actual players here, Kevin. We're gonna play, our favorite game here. Ask. We're gonna go kind of position by position as we tend to do with a lot of these preview episodes. We're gonna get to that after this quick break. All right, as I said, we're gonna play Ask. No real rules as far as like where these players are going as far as ADP. You can consider that in your decision here. But as a reminder, we're playing Ask. I'm going to force you to avoid one of these players, stream one of these players, and keep one of these players. So you're drafting at least one that you expect to keep all season long, even if you don't think one of them will start at the major league level to start the season. Another one that you think you can get away with just streaming them once they come up. And then one you're probably either have no confidence that they will make an impact and you're probably just be avoiding them. Even if they do come up, you won't be bidding a whole bunch on them, no more than a keep your honest bid, or if anything at all. So let's start with catcher, because we are in a little bit of a catcher renaissance. As we talked about a lot of people are talking about it, the fact that you have a lot of options in the first 10 or 12 rounds of your drafts. But I just double tapped catchers the 5-6 turn with the Sal
The
Perez.
4-5 turn.
4-5 turn. Yep, I'm on that side of the board. And yeah, Sal Perez and Adley Rutschman. And you gave me a little shout out in the chat. Yeah, look at you. Go ahead, double tap. But
I gave you the shout out before that had started a run because you double tap in, and then 3 more went in the next 4 picks. So 5 catchers and 6 picks. All of a sudden, I was upset that you had double tapped because I didn't have one yet.
And so you waited a little bit, but you still had options. That's the point I'm getting to, is that you waited longer than you probably have in a lot of your other drafts. But you still had some options you felt comfortable with, especially in your unofficial rule of trying to get 2 guys that are going to get you 500 at bats or more at that position. So with that being said, there still are some really fun, good offensive catchers coming up that we expect to see in 2025. So of these 3 that we expect to see in 2025, full disclosure, James Anderson, shout out over at RotoWire. I definitely stole the expectations of when we see these guys from his top 400 list. So obviously I'm not going to give away any of the actual rankings, but all the guys we're talking about are within his top 100 currently. And they're all rookie eligible. That was another rule that I gave myself going in. So there are going to be mostly guys that have not made their debut yet, but there are a couple scattered in that we saw in 2024, but are still rookie eligible going into 2025. So again, catcher, Kevin, we have Samuel Basallo in Baltimore. Obviously, the Orioles have a young, powerful catcher that is being drafted in the top 5 rounds, 4 rounds of most drafts already, Adley Rutschman. But Samuel Basallo, one of the top prospects in general, never mind at the catcher position in all of baseball, expected to make some kind of debut for Baltimore. Whether or not that is in a full-time role at the catcher position or somewhere else remains to be seen. Dalton Rushing for the Dodgers. A lot of us thought he would be, he would actually break camp somehow in some fashion, especially if Will Smith shows any kind of wear and tear. And then Edgar Quero of the Chicago White Sox, we've kind of talked about the catching situation with the White Sox all offseason as they continue to make weird little kind of tweaks and moves and signings to kind of shore up that position. But obviously none of them come close to what Quero could possibly do if they bring him up early on. So between Basallo, Rushing, and Quero of Baltimore, the Los Angeles Dodgers, and Chicago White Sox, who are you keeping? Who are you streaming? And who are you avoiding once they do come up?
This was fun, Adam, because a few weeks ago, my answer would have been completely the opposite of what my answer is today.
Love it.
Because prior to the Michael Conforto signing, we thought Dalton Rushing might make his debut in 2025 early in the season as an outfielder for the Los Angeles Dodgers. And I was in on that. We still thought they were probably going to bring in Teoscar Hernandez back, but they ended up doing both. They signed Conforto and brought Hernandez back. So I think Rushing is in the minors for most of, if not all of 2025, unless we see injuries, right? They have a great defensive backup catcher that will get his starts, and that Will Smith, of course, is not going to move off unless he's injured. So unless we see, I think there's a better chance with injuries to outfielders that we could still see Dalton Rushing in the Dodgers outfield. But I'm concerned about this now. And so a few weeks ago, he would have been my keep for ask, but now he's my avoid. Samuel Basallo would have been my avoid a few weeks ago due to Adley Rutschman and Gary Sanchez being on the roster. But there's some talk about he can play first base and DH, and he actually played over 50 games at first base over the past 2 seasons in the minors, and fairly evenly split. I think 28 games one season, 28 the other at first base. So there are other pathways depending on what happens with Ryan Mountcastle, either with being moved or injury or performance. So there are other options, and it sounds like Baltimore has said that we will see him at some point in 2025. So all of a sudden, he was my avoid a few weeks ago because there wasn't a spot. Now, not only are there other pathways we're learning about, but the team is saying they want to see him this season. So now he's my keep, and Quero is my streamer just because he's not the only guy, right? They got Kyle Teal as well. So Teal's a year or so older. We may see Teal first. And so kind of wait and see what goes on with the White Sox. He'll be my streamer when we do see him. But yeah, it completely flip-flopped from what this list would have been not very long ago.
Yeah, I mean, but I like your choices here. Of course, the narrative with Baltimore bringing up their prospect, especially their prospect hitters, does not bode well for actually seeing them in playing time. And we'll get to another one in a little bit as well. But I do like your selections overall for the reasonings that you gave, because with all of these, it's all about the path to playing time. Like, they can be the most talented, prospect ever, but if there's not somewhere for them to play on a regular basis, most of them will stay down just so they can continue to get regular reps. And the ones that do come up and get spotty treatment, again, going back to Baltimore, or they play one game and they don't play for 5 days straight. It's just frustrating to roster those players, especially if you spent triple-digit dollars in FAAB on. All right, let's move over to the corner infield here. A couple of interesting names. One that we already talked about, one that I just alluded to, and a new name here. I'll start off with Bryce Eldridge, first base prospect for San Francisco. Of course, Matt Shaw, third base prospect for the Chicago Cubs. And then Kobe Mayo, who did make his debut for the Baltimore Orioles last year, did not play a whole lot. Had a little bit of a stint here or there at the very end, but 2 third basemen and a first baseman here for your choosing pleasure here, Kevin. You pick the guy who hasn't made his debut yet, but could make the biggest impact. Shaw, who we keep thinking is a shoo-in, but now they do weird things with the Cubs. The Cubs are doing weird things by bringing in Justin Turner and trying to muddy the waters there. Or Kobe Mayo, who's already done it.
Yeah, this is tough. And what makes it tough is, once again, roster resource. They don't even have Mayo on the opening day roster. I still think he's my keep here. I think something happened. I think he plays his way in. He only had 126 plate appearances, but performed well. I mean, it wasn't superstar status, but we're talking about a debut, and he had like a 740 OPS, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. So, because of what we talked about with Justin Turner earlier, and that's really scaring me about Matt Shaw. Matt Shaw would be the obvious answer here as a keep for most people, I think, but I'm worried now with what the Cubs are doing. Matt Shaw becomes my streamer because Justin Turner, I just don't think will perform. Whether he does play some third base, whether they move Michael Busch back across the diamond so Justin Turner can play first. But I think we will see Shaw at some point, but it really doesn't look like to me the Cubs are comfortable just handing him the job, even the way it had sounded for a few weeks. Like they didn't say they were going to hand him the job. They said the right things, but it looked like they were penciling him in, and now I'm not so sure. So Kobe Mayo is my keep, knowing that this would be one of those darts. This is I know this is in violation of the game ask. I'm saying he's my keep, but in theory, I would draft him planning on keeping him, but it's a pretty binary decision early in the year. Sure. I could cut bait pretty early if I needed to. Eldridge is just too young. I don't know that we see him in 2025. I know James has his estimated ETA as 2025, but he's so young. I'm just not certain of that. So he's my avoid for that reason. But yeah, as we talked earlier in the show, I'm really worried that we're not going to see match, and it might only be a couple weeks, right? The Cubs are the ones that invented the Chris Bryant treatment. That's why we call it the Chris Bryant treatment. So maybe that's all this Justin Turner signing is, but I'm worried.
Fair enough. Mayo's credit, he really only got as much run as he did because Westberg was hurt as well. So he was able to fill in at third base. Westberg penciled in to be, they've already announced that he will take a couple reps at second base in spring training, but he's going to spend most of his attention at third base. So that would tell me that he's still going to be the starting third baseman for the Baltimore Orioles. Westberg is that is. So the path for playing time is a little muddy, especially if Jackson Holliday can take over second base. Obviously, with Henderson over at shortstop, the rest of the infield is pretty much set. And so Mayo would have to find his way into some kind of utility role or force Westberg's hand to become more of a utility player as well. So there's a lot of moving parts in Baltimore.
Here's something interesting. We're talking about these separately. However, I have kept both Basallo and Kobe Mayo, and I don't see any path to where they both are giving us playing time.
It's like, the multiverse cross. That's an incursion right there. Like that's not how that works. As far as Eldridge goes as well in San Francisco, he might be young, but there very well could very quickly be an opening at first base for the San Francisco Giants if there was an injury. Like they have some players that obviously, the mentality usually is anybody can play first base, which is absolutely not true. But they don't really have a true backup first baseman on the major league roster, at least as Jason has it over a roster resource beyond Lamont Wade Jr. Yes, of course, Helio Ramos could probably fill in at first base here or there. Wilmer Flores could, go in there as well. But like, if they needed somebody to go in there on a regular basis and they felt like he was ready to kind of make that jump and they needed that oomph, that's how that playing time could manifest itself. It's not going to happen on opening day, and it's not going to happen early on as well. So this is definitely like, just watch to see if he gets the call early. And, if you've still got the hammer, feel free to, like, they're not going to call him up unless there's playing time for him to utilize on a regular basis.
Right. And it's something to monitor closely with Bryce Eldridge, because it really appears, for a guy that's 6'7", and typically, like, even Aaron Judge, we were worried about, is he going to make enough contact to make it in Major League Baseball?
Mhm.
Not is he going to make enough contact to be the superstar he is, to make it at all.
Yeah.
Right. And so that is the question. But so far, every time he's moved up a level, he's gotten better. In fact, his walk rate doubled when he went from high A to double A, up to 16%. Because he was doing so much damage, pitchers stopped throwing strikes to him. He's making that good a contact. It'll be something to continue to monitor each level he does go up. He wasn't very good against same-handed pitching at AAA. It was only like 100, a little over 100 plate appearances. But that's what we want to see, is making that adjustment, because as each level he goes up, if he can continue to make contact at 6'7", he crushes baseball.
Yeah. I mean, like, to see him get a little bit under his belt in the PCL and actually like blow the ball away, you get a little worried when a hitter like that doesn't blow the ball away in the PCL. And so you kind of want to see that happen. All right, let's move into the middle infield, Kevin. Some decent names here. One of them, again, made his debut last year already, in Adel Amador over in Colorado. Christian Campbell, one of the top prospects in all of baseball for my Boston Red Sox. And then Caleb Durbin over now in Milwaukee, part of the Devin Williams trade coming over from the Yankees organization. I expect Durbin. I guess Amador has more of a clear pathway to, start on his major league roster since he's already made his debut. But Durbin, I think, makes a clear case for Milwaukee before Campbell does, especially with the addition of Alex Bregman in Boston. But I mean, I don't think there's any question that Campbell has more upside as far as what he can actually produce, especially in Fenway Park. But you have to take into account, again, this is not a dynasty league. This is a single year league that we're talking about. Kristen Campbell, Adele Amador, and Caleb Durbin. Who are you streaming, who are you keeping, and who are you avoiding?
Yeah, prior to the Bregman signing, this would have been Christian Campbell as the keep pretty easily for me. And we may still see him early, but I still think there's moves coming in Boston. You're the Boston fan. I'm sure this is driving you crazy. I'm sure you were loving all of the drama early in the week with Devers saying, no, I'm not going to DH. And Tristan Casas jumping in and having Devers back and telling him he's his third baseman.
I like
but
the Casas comments. The Casas comments that I like the most were like, should these young kids be coming in on opening day? It's like, no, we've got grown men that need to work on some stuff up here.
Yeah. So now, yeah, I still think there's moves in Boston. There's just, it doesn't add up to me, but I can't be as confident we're going to see Christian Campbell as early as I was not very long ago, prior to the Bregman signing. I think, I was excited to see Caleb Durbin a couple of years ago in Arizona, and I liked what I saw. But he does not hit the ball hard. He makes he makes so much contact, strikes out less than 10% of the time, and walks well over 10% of the time. Walks more than he strikes out, and can steal some bases. Very little power, and it has a lot to do he's probably never going to run a high BABIP, even with his speed, because he hits the ball so softly. This is like Luis Arias with some stolen bases, basically, and not nearly as good of a batting average projected for at the major league level, although he has hit for a high average in the minors. This one is tough, and it all has to do with that Bregman signing, because let me knock one out of the way. Amador is my avoid because it's the Rockies, and I believe in Tyro Estrada at second base. They have Tovar at shortstop, so I don't think we're seeing Amador in 2025. I really don't, unless they flip Estrada at the deadline. If he's as good as I think he's going to be, there will be some value there at the deadline.
But the
So
Rockies will find a way
Amador
to
is my
squander that
avoid.
value, so I wouldn't worry about that either.
Or they're going to figure out a way that we don't see Amador on the field when we think we should, is what we typically see from the Rockies
Right.
and their young players, right? So I think just because there's not a ton of fantasy value, even with the playing time, if Caleb Durbin gets it. And in fact, right now, Roster Resource has him short side of a platoon. I think you'll probably get a little more playing time than that, but I don't think that playing time is going to be very valuable to us in fantasy. So, in spite of all the issues there in Boston, I'm going to be confident that there's more moves coming, and I'm going to take the chance on Christian Campbell as my keep. He's the best player by a lot, I think. So it's worth the shot.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, all the words that I keep reading about out of Milwaukee camp, though, is the possibility Bryce Trang moves over to shortstop to fill the gap of Yamas, Joey Ortiz.
Yeah, I think Durbin gets more playing time. Yeah,
Joey Ortiz staying at third base obviously opens up second base, where Durbin, is going to play his best game, more so than maybe Oliver Dunn and any other option that they might have, who they might be, might consider him being in a platoon with. So it's hard to move a guy like Terang off when he just won like with the platinum glove award. And so but I mean, you move him to a shortstop where it's, in consideration for, a position that needs it even more so than second base. Maybe that ends up being what it does. That obviously opens up more of a clear playing time for Durbin. But what he does with it obviously has to be taken into consideration. And if he's, he could play every single day, and if he's not actually producing anything for our fantasy teams beyond a good batting average, like you mentioned, if he's just Luis Arias with maybe a couple extra steals, are we still drafting that? Are we going out of our way to
in deep leagues? We'll be fabbing him for stolen base streamer.
Yeah, there we go.
That's what we're looking at with Durbin, I think.
Or if he does have a 7-game week, we can get the most out of that batting average, at least in that.
Score some runs as well. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. All right, we got we got the infield out of the way altogether. Let's move out to the outfield. We'll stick with my Boston Red Sox and start off with Roman Anthony. Again, same situation as Christian Campbell. A lot of people, myself included, saw a very clear path to him being on the opening day roster, being the Red Sox version of, rookie of the year candidate, try to get that draft pick and all that. Don't know that is in the cards unless he blows everything out of the water in spring training now, but still on the table. Chase DeLauder in Cleveland. A lot of us thought maybe we'd see his debut last year. Injuries kind of plagued him for most of the season as well. Didn't give much of a reason for Cleveland to make that move. Should change this year going into 2025. And then Dylan Cruz, who obviously did make his debut last year for the Washington Nationals, expected to be, at least according to Jason, in the top third of that lineup for the Nationals, playing every single day. So I think based on that, your answer is probably going to be pretty quick and clear. But prove me wrong.
Oh, you're exactly right. I'm gonna roll with Dylan Cruz. He may not be the superstar that some thought he was going to be coming out of LSU, but we've talked about this Washington lineup, and if he's going to be in that top third as it appears, then Yeah, absolutely. Out of the gate. I would like for Roman Anthony. And in fact, I did draft him in a FAAB league, in my Bubba and the Bloom listener auction league.
Mhm.
I did draft Roman Anthony in the auction portion, even before the reserve rounds. But I don't expect to see him opening day. Chase DeLauder's the avoid, unfortunately. Cleveland needs a player like Chase DeLauder, but we've seen less than 100 games in 3 professional
Right.
seasons so far. We have to see him on the field before I can even support him being on my roster.
Yeah, I thought this would probably be the easiest one of the bunch. Sad to say that, Roman Anthony was not going to be that keep, but maybe if Cruz wasn't in this bunch, that maybe that bumps Anthony into that situation. Because even if he doesn't start the season, I don't think he's long for Worcester. I think
Right.
that they keep him at arm's length and he's like kind of first man up. And once he's up for good. This is not a guy that, again, you bring up and down. Boston and Worcester are not far apart, but he is not Edward Olivares. And so I don't expect him to be moving up and down a whole lot.
I didn't want to put a substitute in like that we have when playing Ask a couple of times recently, but another outfielder worth bringing up, similar to Chase DeLauder. When healthy, he's been amazing in the minors, but we need to see Emmanuel Rodriguez stay healthy for an extended period of time. If so, we will see him in Minnesota this year, and I would want him on my roster.
I'm glad you brought him because he was on this grouping before I added Cruz in there just because. But yeah, I mean, Minnesota scares me on both sides of the ball, man. Just with all the platoons on the hitting side, and then all the
And
inning.
every
Yeah.
superstar prospect they've had has been injury prone.
Yes.
Buxton, Lewis, now
Kirilloff.
Rodriguez.
Yep.
Let's go on Kirillov. Yeah, already retired
I
Kirillov.
know.
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, I hope Kirilloff just seemed like
So
such a guy that like
so
had
Rodriguez is going to be the one to break the string.
yeah. All right. Fair. I like it. I like it. I like it's a good mentality to have. I hope Kirilov does stuff in baseball still. I just hope he turns into
Mhm.
like the Buster Posey of, retiring early and then moving on and doing stuff either within baseball or baseball adjacent. It seemed like he was just like student of the game type of guy. And I like to see him continue doing things, even if it's not on the field. All right, we'll close it out here with some pitchers. We didn't bother doing relief. I didn't bother doing relievers because you just can't do that really with prospects. So the
We lost Adam there for a moment. Hop in the chat here. Good to see you, Uncle Ted. I'm sure Adam will be back here shortly. Well, and then he will edit this portion out on uh for the podcast drop on Sunday. But for those of you listening live right now on YouTube, Adam's having technical issues. Yep, I knew Uncle Ted would be in support of Chase DeLauder. Um, and if healthy, I agree. We have not seen him healthy. Um, so that is, yeah, he likes Roman Anthony as well. He's got a few other names here. Jock Caglianone, Kansas City. Once again, I don't think we see him till late in the year, unfortunately. Um, so yeah, here comes Adam jumping back in, it appears. Hopefully. Something was happening on my screen. It moved me over to his spot, actually. So um, yeah, we have starting pitchers is the last category here. Adam brought in Bubba Chandler of Pittsburgh, Andrew Painter of Philadelphia, and Noah Schultz of the White Sox. And this is an intriguing grouping for me that I'm not 100% certain that we'll see Bubba Chandler early in 2025, but he's going to be my keep here because I don't think we see Noah Schultz. I'm not interested. I'm not even interested in Sean Burke. Sean Burke can be a great pitcher one day, but I think we are overestimating what these guys may do based on what Garrett Crochet did in 2024. And I don't think either of these guys is Garrett Crochet. So I have no interest in a White Sox pitcher, no matter how talented of a prospect. So that is my avoid. Andrew Painter, Philadelphia has told us they want him on the big league roster by July. That's great. That's a long time for a stash in an NFBC format. So I will stream Andrew Painter. I'd try to keep him on my roster until we see him. Hopefully, we see him earlier than that. But because it does appear that it may be after the All-Star break before we see him, then I will take the chance that we see Bubba Chandler a little earlier in the season. They do have a couple of guys in the rotation that want, well, Bailey Falter might not even last very long. We could see him take that spot, and then injury with, you know, in any of the guys in this rotation, obviously, and especially guys like Andrew Heaney, we've seen on and off of the roster in the past due to injury. So, Adam, I just filled everybody in. I went through the last grouping. I'm keeping Bubba Chandler, even though we may not see him for a while, because I know we're not going to see Andrew Painter. Well, it sounds like, if injuries could change things, obviously, but it sounds like the Phillies are planning on him joining the rotation around the All-Star break. They've said July is when they want him in their rotation. So I will still stream him because I am not rostering a Chicago White Sox pitcher. Sean Burke and now I'm drawing a blank on the guy we're talking about here, Noah Schultz.
Yeah.
That they both could they could be great pitchers one day, but they are not going to be on my roster in 2025 because they're not going to do anything close to what Garrett Crochet did. And I think that's what's in people's heads.
Right.
Is the only reason we're talking about either one of these guys.
Yeah. I'm really afraid that like Andrew Painter is going to become Spencer Howard 2.0.
Oh, I hope not.
Only because it's Philadelphia. And we just haven't actually seen somebody come.
You know, I kept drafting Spencer Howard for about 5 years.
Yeah, you could. I mean, it was that one season
because I saw him in Arizona, and he was, it literally was like a man playing with boys out there on the field. He was head and shoulders the best player on the field when I saw him in Arizona. Mm-hmm. So I just could never get away from him.
Yeah, of course. You have that one experience. It's hard not to. Obviously Andrew Painter has had a longer standing, relationship with success. Spencer Howard, it was just like he kind of came out of nowhere in that AAA season. It just never manifested itself in the majors. But you start thinking, who was the last really good, like the last ace to come up through the system? I mean, it's Aaron Nola probably. But like besides that, he's like, yeah, they've had some successes, but like nobody like to the extent that we thought Spencer Howard could be, or hopefully that Andrew Painter still could be as well. So I don't know how much trust I put in that organization to produce another ace. So hopefully Andrew Painter proves me wrong when he does finally, make his debut at or after the All-Star break.
Yeah, and that's why I'm taking my chance on Bubba Chandler. I don't have any idea when we'll see him, and he's not on the 40-man roster. Mm-hmm. But a few years ago, Eno Saris made comments multiple times about how good Seattle's pitching development had become, and that came to fruition. They have the best starting staff in baseball, and he has made a comment similar to what Pittsburgh is now doing with their pitching staff. And we've seen it with Schemes, Jared Jones, there's Braxton Ashcraft come in. So I'll take the gamble on Bubba Chandler getting into this rotation earlier in the season than Painter does, and performing when he does.
Yeah. So that'll be fun to watch. I mean, Pittsburgh obviously doing some fun things, being very aggressive with their top of the line starters, as in the names that you just mentioned, Jones and Skeens, with a lot of success. So wouldn't be totally surprising to see them do the same thing with Chandler, even with the signings of Heaney and the like. So a lot of fun darts to consider, whether it's in your drafts or early in the season, if you have the ability. Something that Uncle Ted has mentioned at the very beginning of the chat, and I think he's mentioned it 2 or 3 times as well. That's worth mentioning is, especially in NFBC, watch your drops. Watch the drops that are happening, because a lot of these guys will get drafted and a lot of them will get dropped. They will be available to be picked up even before their debut. So if you do find yourself with some flexibility, you find yourself with a couple extra dollars, and you want to stash these guys for a week or two in the case that they do get called up, and you don't have to spend triple digits. You can spend $15, $10, $5 even, when everybody's just like waiting for that debut. Take advantage of that. Take advantage of that flexibility. You're not going to have that flexibility every single week. So if you can throw a buck or two in that time that you do have it, what's the harm? You save yourself a couple $100 in FAAB in the process, or you drop them in 2 weeks because you lost that flexibility. Fine. But take that chance when you have the ability. Kevin, I gave my little piece of advice. I want you to close this out here with any other further advice as we get even deeper into the heart of draft season, as we started off the show talking about.
Well, I was going exactly where you went. So I'll expand on it a little bit. One, I have drafted players that I knew I was going to drop in the first FAAB period in the past, to get them into the player pool. And it goes for injured players as well. It goes for you have to play. You have to be on the 26-man roster, right? In order to be able to be picked up in FAAB if you weren't drafted. So it's not just rookies, it's everybody. And so I did it in my main event last season with Robbie Ray. I wasn't the one that picked Robbie Ray back up. Right. And when I have done this in the past with rookies or injured guys, I haven't been the one to get the guy back. And this is why. Because I think this is the way to do what you were saying there. Yes, 100% watch the drops. And any Sunday when you're putting in your FAAB, if you have your starting pitching set for the week, you don't think you can improve on it, or your FAAB, you already have that all set up with a backup in case something tragic happens between Sunday night and getting our lineups in on Monday. Typically, unless you have a couple of team streamers or a really good reliever that you like to have on your roster that you can use anytime you want to, you really only need 1 or 2 backup pitchers as your 7 backups is what I have come to. I want my coverage for every hitter position if I need to make that change on Friday. If I have that with a roster spot left, there's somebody that is expendable, and then pick up one of these guys even if you're not so sure he's coming up immediately. Grab one of the guys that you have noticed has been dropped, hang on to them as long as you can. You may end up dropping them as well, but somebody's going to grab them. That's my point. Drafting a guy in order to get him in the player pool and then waiting until you think you're certain he's coming up, somebody else is probably going to have grabbed him by that point. So watching the drops and grabbing a guy like these anytime you have an extra roster spot for the week on that slim chance. I was as surprised as anybody a couple of years ago when Michael Harris II got called up right after we'd talked about him. Yeah. I talked about him in the wild card section, somebody I was keeping an eye on. No inclination whatsoever he was coming up a couple of days later.
Right.
But if you'd have grabbed him on Sunday just because you had an extra roster spot, then you got him for $1 instead of hundreds.
Yep. And I mean, and watch what they're doing. Most of these guys are coming up from AAA. Some of them are going to jump from AA, but you can watch what they're doing. If they're on a hot streak and you're trying to debate between 2 or 3 guys to use that flexible roster spot on, put your waterfall in bids for all 3 of them, but rank them accordingly of who's going to have the clearer path into jumping in. The guy who's, 0 for his last 20, even if there's an opening, still might not get the call just because, what use is he going to be when in that kind of a cold streak. So keep an eye on what they're actually doing, of course, in AAA as well. All right. Well, after all of that, that's going to do it for episode 203 of On the Wire. Kevin, we need to find something else to talk about. We're done with our preview episodes. And we're about to get into actual.
What do we have?
We have actual games
3 weeks until FAAB. So we only have a couple of weeks. We have to come up with something.
Well, we have actual spring training games, actual like semi-meaningful games to really analyze it and pick through. So look forward to that and more as we make our way into March and then through March into April as well. But that's going to wrap it up for episode 203. Thanks for joining us. After all that, I am Adam Howe on behalf of Kevin Hasting. Thanks for listening, and we bid you goodbye.